who've landed on the Daily Objective from the Ayn Rand Center UK. So delighted you've joined us. And you could be from jolly old England, high probability of that, but you also could be from all around the world. We are a global community of people interested in objectivism, all different levels of knowledge of objectivism. Some people just starting out, students of every different level of experience, and some real experts along the way. Some people who've not just only been fans of Miss Rand's for decades, for a long time, but also real integral parts of the movement, if you will, the objectivist movement. And we're really so excited to have one of those individuals with us today, Dr. Cristina LePort. I've known for many years. She's a longtime member of the objectivist movement. She is a physician and the author of this fascinating, really exciting new book, Dissection. It's a medical and political thriller. It's out now. It's on Amazon. We're going to have the links in the chat. We're going to talk a bit about your history and your interest in objectivism, but of course, the new book as well. So thank you for being here, Cristina, and welcome to the Daily Objective.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's really Dr. Peikoff often talked famously about how hard it was for him to write. You know, it's like for him, I always thought Dr. Peikoff made writing like pulling teeth. And that's what it's like for me. Now, you were a successful doctor. What did you need from writing? Why did you pick up this very difficult process of putting together a book such as this?
Right. Actually, I never really liked to write when I was in school in Italy. I was born in Italy. And my passion for writing started in the middle of my midlife crisis as a doctor. I had practiced internal medicine for about 20 years. And I got to a point where I really needed something a little different, a little new. And so I wanted to try to get into cardiology. And while I was waiting, because it was a difficult thing to do, I was looking for other different things I could be interested in. And I was reading The Art of Fiction by Ayn Rand. That's actually, I figured, wow, that's incredible. I was very intrigued. You get into this, new world that you create, and then you create characters you want to meet, and you can make anything you want happen. And I said, I'm going to do that. So I write my first novel, which wasn't really a novel, and it took a lot of coaching and everything because I had no training. So somebody told me, I needed to learn a lot of things before after a few years, I started writing better. And then I got the idea for this particular book, which was kind of interesting. I had been rejected forever for my first book. I mean, massive rejection, tsunamis, rejection. And one day I was standing, in front of the TV, and I was kind of depressed.
I'll just say, Cristina, I mean, that's a little familiar too for students of objectivism who know anything about Ayn Rand's history. I believe the Fountainhead was turned down like a dozen times.
Yes, a dozen times. I beat that over and over because I was turned down hundreds of times. I beat Ayn Rand on that.
Persevered. I mean, you persevered, and you got this published, and with a reputable publisher and a very reputable promotion behind it.
Yeah. So I actually, got trained by coaches and editors, and then one day I was standing in front of the TV and I saw this commercial about aspirin, and there was a man on a suit who got a card, and the card said, your heart attack will arrive tomorrow. And then, of course, the commercial said, well, not everybody gets a notice like that. You don't know when your heart attack arrives, so you have to take aspirin. So I said, well, that's my next book, and the hell with my first book. So I got this idea. You see, your heart attack will arrive in an hour, and that's how the book starts. And then I had to build the whole plot around that one card.
Yeah, I mean, it's on the cover as well, and it's such an interesting device. And I want to mention that at host's discretion, our most generous super chatters today are going to get a copy of this brand new hardcover shipped to their U.S. address. But we need your super chat support. So take this opportunity to support Dr. LePort in her work, but also the Ayn Rand Center in bringing you every element of the world of objectivism. It's almost like Dr. LePort, this idea of getting a card that says your heart attack is going to arrive in 1 hour. This is like everyone's nightmare come to life. Like, what would you do if you knew that in an hour you were going to have a heart attack? Are you going to finish that coffee? Are you going to watch the end of that show? I mean, how would your life change if you had this? And this is what this whole book is premised around. And, one thing that I was fascinated about the book in general is like, you really create suspense. I mean, this is a book that reads like a Tom Clancy suspenseful thriller. You're on the edge of your seat, even if you're laying back reading it. So how do you do that as an author? Kind of build it up in our heart and our emotions. How do you do that as an author?
Actually, being a doctor actually helps because the profession of medical profession is really a very good backdrop for a thriller, because we deal with life or death all the time, and that's the highest stakes you can have. You have to, but then of course you have to escalate the stakes. You can, you start with a heart attack, you have to go on to more and more, and it has to get worse and worse and expand, and then at the end you have to actually wonder, how am I going to get back to normal? How do I solve this mess that I put my characters into? And you have to do it satisfactorily, because I hate when I read a book and then I get to the end and there is no real satisfaction. Everything, is kind of still hanging. And so it's hard. You have to really think about it. I mean, I was driving around now to create this, thinking about this plot, and sometimes missing freeway exits and try to focus on my patients.
That's what I'm so impressed about is, it famously took Miss Rand, I believe, 12 years to write Atlas. And I don't know how long it took you, but, as a relatively new writer, this read, as I said, like a real action-packed thriller. And, what I found so fascinating was that this isn't an objectivist book, but it's a book in which values really matter. The issues at stake are very important, and not just life or death. And I won't want to be a plot spoiler and put too much into it, but this is something that kind of raises the emotions in its audience in terms of values. The characters' values are very high stakes. So, there's something that is obviously, I think, one as a reader could say that's really influenced by objectivism, and my sense is your experience that are coming through in the pages of your characters.
Yes, of course. Actually, in The Art of Fiction, Ayn Rand really said it correctly. You can read everything, like if you could know the heart of fiction from the first word to the last, that's everything, almost everything you need to write fiction. But once you sit down and write, you have to forget about everything, and you just write about your characters and your plot. Of course, you're going to be influenced by your philosophy constantly. But you can't sit down, thinking, well, I'm going to write an objectivist book. I mean, it's not going to work, because it's going to come out so fake and strange,
And isn't that always kind of what's so powerful about Miss Rand's work, is that they're just good books. And that's why some people read them and they don't necessarily enjoy them, but they read them and they say, oh yeah, that was fun. I really enjoyed that. Or that was exciting. And that's to your credit, you've written just that, a very good book. In fact, one of your fans, Mary Aline, super generous contribution for the Ayn Rand Center UK. Thank you, Mary Aline. She says, I pre-ordered the book. I read it in a few days as soon as it arrived and loved it. Also, Dr. LePort did a great job of integrating criticism of the FDA into her plot. So to this point, and this is a medical thriller, but there's also a lot of politics, and that almost, epitomizes what's going on in the UK and the US. I mean, medicine and politics go hand in hand, and that's part of what the high stakes in nature of what's playing out in the book.
Yes, medicine is one of the most important, obviously, thing in politics. I mean, that's how you enslave population, by socializing medicine, and it was well known to the Russians, our friends, that's how you do it. Is the keystone to socialism. And it was said, I think it was Lenin or Stalin who said that. And so they're very tied together. I mean, medicine is extremely important. And so, of course, it comes out how I feel about what I think about the FDA. And so the political aspect, I didn't sit down to write a book, about any terrorism or anything like that, because in general, I really don't like too much those, the books that go into great detail about that. But obviously, I had to put something on the political side, and so there is it's actually very, very today, we're talking about Iran. So the book ended up showing actually to some extent the evil of Iran and how big of a threat that is. I didn't start, that thinking that way, but not to give away everything. But it's there. And the one thing I wanted to show was that actually sometimes people who are committing crimes in the name of religion, they actually end up disrespecting the very religion they're saying they're committing crime for, because of course they are human beings, so they have to live, and in order to live, they have to actually go against this religion. So
yeah, I mean,
so they're trapped in a way.
It dramatizes, so much of the life and death, as you said, kind of spectacle that plays out in the world of medicine, so much because of these. Let me ask you, was some of that frustration the reason? I mean, maybe I'm psychologizing here, but is that part of the reason maybe you had some of your words, midlife crisis? I mean, was it the FDA, the changing nature of medicine in the US that made you think, this is just not working for me anymore?
Definitely, all of the above. I got very tired to be a gatekeeper. That was the life crisis of being an internal medicine doctor. I was basically a gatekeeper to prevent patients to go to specialists. So I figured, well, I'm going to become a specialist. So at least I'm in the other side. I'm not the one who's preventing them from going. But absolutely, that was a very important thing in my life.
I mean, given your expertise, and part of what I love about this is that, as I said, it reads like one of those books that someone who wasn't a doctor would have to spend a year just doing the research. It is some of the specifics that you drop in the whole medical world are so, as I said, it's like a Tom Clancy thing where he can nail this submarine does this and the nuclear power. Like, you really almost feel like you're getting a medical education reading this. So it has a sense of being a thoroughly researched and detail-oriented. And I think for me, that kind of lends that sense of heightened reality, like this really could happen. This exists in our world. That's part of, to me, what makes it really exciting. I mean, it's not in the near future, or this is something that almost feels real, even though it's drama on its face. And maybe I'll have to say too, I love the fact that you mentioned Miss Rand's art of nonfiction. Now the art of fiction and the art of nonfiction. These are unread, unknown books by Miss Rand. One tackles how you write nonfiction. You read the fiction one, or maybe you're sure you read them both. But that small work had a big impact on you alone.
Definitely, because even if you don't write, if you read The Art of Fiction, you really learn how to appreciate fiction, even if you don't write. I mean, it's amazing, you literally learn. And then, of course, it's like Dr. Peikoff, the ninth place, is almost like it complements that, because then you learn how to appreciate and criticize and identify the plot and the plot theme, the characterization. So it's a wonderful book, and it's so short. I mean, if you could just know everything that's in it, I mean, you don't need anything else to write.
I have to say, I've always been more generally correlated towards nonfiction, but The Art of Nonfiction, same thing. It's an easy read. You could read it probably in a day. And you saw kind of Rand's razor on display there. This just real concrete commitment to facts, essentializing, thoughtful, organized presentation. So those are great reads. Did you do, in Atlas, Rand has the character of the fishwife, which her snuck in, her Orson Welles. Is there anything like that in Dissection, where it's like you sneak yourself in, or you sneak a character in that might be someone we know?
Well, it's kind of funny because I'm really identifying more with the FBI agent Mulville.
What's the backstory there?
Well, he has this arc, he starts being really, it's, I don't know, a moron, really. Not that I am like that, but I just, when you write, you have to put yourself into the characters when you write the dialogue and everything. And the most fun I had was to putting myself into this guy to write his dialogue, because, he's very crass and he's very rude. And I just had most fun. Not that I was identifying myself, but I had most fun putting myself into his shoes to say what he would say. It was very liberating. He curses.
That's Enric, who is one of our YouTube members. Thank you, Enric. He points out that the lectures that the Art of Fiction book come from are also available. So you can actually listen to those lectures as well. There's tons of ways out there to get that content. So, we always say, Cristina, in this program, when people say, oh, I've read Ayn Rand, I say, no, you haven't. I mean, there's so much out there. And this is just a real emphasis how powerful it was for you that, you wanted to leave one career and embark on a whole nother one. But tell me what it was like for you. There's a story that Dr. Peikoff has told when he was with Miss Rand, when Atlas was just published, and I'm paraphrasing or probably bastardizing more than anything, but it was something to the effect of Rand said, don't forget this moment, don't give up for moments like these. What was that like when you got that? Was that a similar thing?
That was it. I thought about it that way. I thought about it. She said, it's all worth it. Like when you go through all that struggle, and I had gone through all that struggle. It was like, it was so, when I got that contract in my hand, the publishing contract for my book. And when I got the book, the box comes and you see it, it's your books, and you open it up and it's there, it's solid, everything you wrote and your research is right there. And now people are actually going to read it. I mean, your things, the passion that you put into it and all that research and all that stuff that you put into it is someone is going to read it. And you're going to enter their lives, you're going to create emotions into them, and hopefully you'll entertain them. And, it's just amazing. It really came to mind.
I mean, to anyone who subscribes to the old Elizabeth Warren Obama, you didn't build that thing, something like this, where you toil. I mean, you weren't Rourke in the quarry necessarily, but, in the intellectual quarry, in the spiritual quarry. And to achieve something like that, to me, is the best of what Objectivism brings out in people. And Bonnie Bertrand, great super chat. Thank you, Bonnie. She wants to know, was the Art of Fiction how you discovered Miss Rand? My sense is no, you had been reading a student of Objectivism.
I read Atlas Shrugged first. My husband gave me Atlas Shrugged, well, my not husband then gave me Atlas Shrugged. And I read it in a couple of weeks. And I was actually in a bad marriage at that time. And I decided to get divorced because of it. So because
of Atlas.
My life, great, yes, because I figure, you really cannot live a lie. You have to, it's going to influence everything else. Everything is integrated. So that's how it happened. So the Art of Fiction came a little later, not much later, but a few years later. I hadn't read it yet, and I didn't really read it to start writing. But after I finished, I just felt like I wanted to try because it sounded like something really interesting to do.
I just, one of the things I like about this is that, when people say it's an easy read, well, to me, it just means like it's the type of thing that you feel very comfortable reading. You just keep turning. You don't realize, oh, I've been at this for, 90 minutes, 2 hours, and I still want to keep going. And how much of that as an author are you thinking, technical, because we think of an author, an artist, it's like, oh, my speech, my monologue, my character. But how much of you as an author are you thinking, gee, this thing has gone on too long, or my audience doesn't want, they're bored by this, or, how much of that are you in the seat of the audience thinking, speed it up, I mean, it's difficult to know what it's going to feel like for the audience sometimes.
Yes. Well, you can't think that way while you start writing, obviously. That's one of those things that you can't think about it. But when you edit, then you have to. When you edit your book, you have to be very, very critical of all that. You have to keep in mind that you're writing for other people to read it. You don't just write for yourself, and something can be very clear to you, to me as a doctor. But if somebody is not a doctor, a lot of people are not going to be doctors or even in the medical field who are going to read this book. And so you have to keep that in mind, because otherwise people are going to be worried about understanding. If you have to stop thinking about what does this mean? Oh, let me go back. That obviously is going to kill the thrill immediately. You can't do that.
Did you have a sense, I want to keep it under this amount of words?
Well, it was relatively easy to do, but yes, you have to, because most of all, your first book can be much longer than 100,000 words, because you know, they're not going to publish it. You know, if you write Atlas Shrugged as your first book, you're not going to get published. I mean, unless you're maybe Ayn Rand, but they're not going to publish a 1,000 pages book and take a chance on a new author that nobody knows. You know, so you have to keep it about 100,000 or so, more or less, you know, 10,000.
I mean, how sensitive are you to reviews? You know, does it make you a second-hander to, and there's going to be a lot of reviews on this, because many people are in favor of I don't want to say the regulation that you oppose in the book that makes it sound too simplistic, but many people are trying to preserve the system that you show decaying away our health, both in the US and the UK. So how sensitive are you to reviews, you know, from or criticism?
Well, I was much more sensitive to the rejections. I tried very hard to not to make the rejection hurt me, but every rejection hurt because, you know, as you put so much work into this, it's like your baby. And so somebody actually, you know, just rejecting, and if sometimes like 5 minutes, the answer would come back in 5 minutes, or the answer would, it really hurts. I mean, you can't help it. I don't think it makes you a second-hander. You try to tell yourself, you know, well, who cares about this particular person? But now the reviews so far have been very good. So, and I was very pleased. I mean, that makes me a second-hander, so be it. But of course, you know, you again, if they come back not too good, occasionally there is, you know, some review in Amazon that is not completely favorable. I feel a little twinge of pain. You know, I'd like to know that, you know, why is that? Maybe I'll write better if I know, at least if I knew what is the criticism, then I could at least consider it. But a lot of times you don't even know. So that part kind of hurts. I don't think any less of my book because I get that, but I can't help, you know, feeling a little bit.
Well, you know, it's always good to have haters. That's a good sign. But I have to say that you mentioned you've got 3 New York Times bestselling authors who are gushing over this in the back of the book. Lee Child.
There's 4. There's not 4, actually. There's Alex Epstein.
Alex Epstein's, you know, so this book is getting a lot of buzz.
Leonard Peikoff. Leonard Peikoff actually really liked it. He said he was, actually, I was really scared when I gave it to Leonard Peikoff. And then he said, oh, I'm going to read, I don't know if I could read it. And then he said, well, I read the first 2 chapters, you know, and I figure I'm going to get to it in a couple of months. And I couldn't put it down. I said, wow.
Well, Dr. Peikoff's book quote is actually featured on the back. Dr. Peikoff said, it's a suspenseful, ingenious, and well-written thriller with a fully satisfying conclusion. I can't wait to read the author's next one. And actually, that's what another very generous super chat from Arialine wanted to know. I mean, when's your next book coming out? And I don't know, you might need a few years off after this. Or my sense is you're probably going to be busy promoting this one for a while.
Yes, I have 4 other books already written. Because
4 other books already written?
4 other books. It took me so long to get an agent that I wrote 4 books. The only thing I actually mitigate the rejection was to go home and write more, try to write better. And so I actually have 4 books in different stages of editing. So I have a prequel to this one, and I have a sequel. And I have another.
Hollywood, we've got your whole thing already played out.
Is there.
Yeah, I mean, Jerry Bruckheimer or whatever, get on this. This is, this is like the thing Netflix could do an amazing, or any of these studios could do a really smart, thoughtful series about. Sharp, biting, exciting. It reads like that.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope so. We're trying.
Well, Apollo, we have a lot of really generous super chat. In fact, Gene Walters wants to know, he gave us a very generous super chat. And Gene, because you give us a generous super chat, we're going to be sending, oh wait, you already ordered it. Well, we're going to be sending you something else. He ordered the book, and he wants to know, what's the most rare disease you've ever treated, Dr. LePort? You've worked at a lot of medicine.
Well, dissection is pretty rare, because in 45 years or so that I've been a doctor, I've seen maybe 3 or 4. So it is pretty rare disease. The most rare, there was one disease that throws clots everywhere. That was very hard to diagnose because it shows up. I don't even remember the name of it, to be honest with you, because I had never actually encountered it before and I didn't know the name. And then I Googled it and it actually had been described. But that was maybe even worse than this. But dissection itself is pretty rare. It's one of the rarest diseases I've ever encountered.
What's so so much inspiring about your story, Dr. LePort? I mean, you're an immigrant story, you're an accomplished professional, but people think, I think often of those in medicine and the sciences as is it left brain or right brain, one of those, but it's like this side, and then the creative is like the other, but you bridge that so effortlessly. Is that the same muscle in your brain? Same thing that's being triggered to be a writer as it is to be a practicing physician?
Well, like I said, there are very many overlap between a doctor and a writer, most of all a writer of thrillers, because again, you deal with life or death, and then also you have to be able to integrate many things, many clues into a diagnosis if you're a doctor, or into the mystery and the mystery solution if you are a writer. And so those are two very, very important overlap there.
Well, in a weird way, that's kind of what a doctor gets.
Exactly.
Somebody walks in with a serious issue, and that's almost like saying your death is going to arrive, in one day. And the clock is ticking. So the doctor, it's like
the time. Yes, the pressure of time is another thing. Absolutely, for the doctor and for the thriller writer. So there are a lot of overlaps. There is no doubt about it.
Apollo would like to know, do you have any diet advice for a healthy heart?
Well, they tell you that you've got to eliminate most of the animal fat, right? I mean, all animal fats are bad because they're all cholesterol except for fish. So if you do that, unfortunately, we have genes that make us really like fat and sugar and all that because we still have the genes from our ancestors, when people were running for 2 weeks to catch an animal and you have to eat it raw because there's no fire. So our genes make us like all that stuff that now is, since we want to live a lot longer, that we were, allowed to live in general in the past. These genes work against us. So they make us like the wrong things. So it's not a curse from God that you're the wrong things. It's just, I think it's genetic. We haven't evolved. Because right now we walk to the store to buy steaks, and eggs.
Well, I mean, would it be enough to say, maybe try to focus a little bit more? None of this is medical advice, by the way. But is it enough to say maybe focus a bit more on like the leafy greens rather than the processed carbs and the very fatty meats?
Exactly. Yeah.
Cream
fat,
Right.
Eliminate cholesterol as you can, because that's what
you do vanilla.
Well, chocolate, the very dark chocolate is actually not too bad because there isn't too much butter there,
All right. Ice cream, I suppose, but all right. Enric wants to know, how much attention work do you see in creating the characters to carry the story? Kind of like how do you make us care about these characters? How much attention do you put into that?
The characters are obviously extremely important. If you don't care about the character, obviously, you don't care about reading the book. I start with the plot usually, but then of course now I have the characters. So the other books I already have the characters. It's kind of interesting because you get to really like your characters, and some of them more than others. For example, there is a young woman, her name is Bloom, that shows up at the end of the book. Towards the end, and she's very, very efficient, and she's just a clerk in the hospital helping the FBI, to find, what he needs to find, the new president and all these other things. I don't want to give away the plot. So I actually like her so much that she's the protagonist of the next book. She becomes, a cyber specialist FBI agent because, she helped and Mulville becomes a director, so he kind of mentors her and all that. So you get really attached to this character, and you have to tell them about, their life and how they can be just cartoons,
Right. Almost, you get the sense you need to know what they went say in different situations, even if that's not in the book.
You have to put yourself into them when you do the character, when you do the dialogue. It's one of the fun parts, you know, so because you have to put yourself into this character and then the answer into the other character. What would he say? And then you have to kind of imagine someone. That's the other thing. You have to know how to read people, which is in common with doctors. You have to read people to make a diagnosis, and you have to read people to write characters. So you pick a character, you know, somebody you know or you've read about, and then you kind of transform it. That's how you create them.
Bonnie would ask, not to do any plot spoilers, but could you briefly explain the disease dissection?
Yes. So an artery has 3 layers, and the dissection is a split between the inner layer and the second. So when the blood, when there is a little lesion, a little cut somehow, either trauma or cholesterol plaque or whatever, and there is a breach into the inner layer of an artery, then the arterial blood is so powerful, it starts pushing through, and it creates a false channel, a false lumen, by splitting like Velcro 2 of the layers. So the blood goes here, and by bulging, it blocks the artery. And then by continuing this dissection, it goes to area where other branches come out, and these branches then get closed down by this false lumen. So for example, if it's in the aorta and it goes up in the arch and it gets to the coronary arteries, when they come out of the aorta, then you get a heart attack. And if it goes into the carotid, progresses, then you get a stroke because the carotid closed down. And then if it continues and the arterial wall gets so weak that it bursts open, then the blood gushes out and then the patient dies.
Oh, yeah.
Isn't that good? I mean, it's a good thriller story.
I should have I'm a little vasovagal. I apologize. I should have mentioned that.
No. I'm sorry.
You know what that means. Some of our audience.
You should have stopped me.
No, man. That's what I'm saying. It's that type of really, Dr. LePort knows her stuff, and she integrates that real fascinating level of medical excitement and thriller into this. So thank you for giving us even just a taste of that. I'm overplaying it a little bit, but I mean, as I said, this has, and then the political angle as well. We only have a minute or 2 left, but talk a bit about why Iran. Iran seemed like more center stage maybe 10, 12 years ago with the war on terrorism and whatnot. And a lot of younger Americans now aren't even as aware of just kind of what goes on in Iran and why, in your estimation, it's such an evil theocracy.
I don't know exactly why Iran, but there's no doubt that it is, because I mean, most of the people who did arm or tried to do arm to the United States, they were trained there, even though, they ended up in different countries. And it's just if you read, because I had to do a lot of research, if you read what some of the leaders of Iran, I mean, the quote that I quoted at the end is actually real. I took it from Google. It's something that the president said against the United States. I mean, the president of Iran. So right. I didn't make it up. And it was horrible. I mean, so that's how they feel about us, because they, their extreme religion, when the extremists worship death, and we worship life.
20 some years ago, people had an expectation that there was going to be another major terrorist attack in the US or in the UK. Is that fresh in your mind? Yeah,
I do. I remember.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really scary. It makes you feel, let's hope that what the Objectivists are doing, with the Ayn Rand Institute and all that overcomes that, because in the end, we are for life, so it should be easy to overcome.
Of course. This is epitomizes that. I think this is a great, exciting thriller. Your story, in terms of having written it, is really exciting, and your background of having come to, Rand wanted to be a writer from the get-go, and the way you discovered it and toiled to get this published, and the reviews that you've already gotten. Harry Newman, who's a very well-known architect, really a lot of those star celebrity homes people know, says you should fill Dr. LePort's prescription for dissection. and buckle up because you're in for a hell of a heart pounder. And that's exactly how I felt. You really get roped into this one in a fun way. So worth it. And we have the link in the chat to buy there. So thank you so much, Dr. LePort. You'll come back again. We'll talk about some of these other aesthetic issues because I want to still ask you some of your favorite authors, some of your other experiences with objectivism. So will you join us again?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And please, if you like the book, give me some reviews on Amazon because I need a lot more than I have. I don't have too many.
Absolutely.
So
leave some good words. Dr. LePort, she's a long, great member of Objectivism, a great, inspiring woman and story, and you're really going to enjoy Dissection. So check it out. Leave us a chat, leave her a good remark, and join us again Monday for another edition of the Daily Objective from the Ayn Rand Center UK. Until then, it's Cristina LePort, author of Dissection, and Jonathan Hoenig from CapitalistPig.com, wishing you best premises.